When people hear the term DLC, they tend to think of general cosmetics, rare consumable items, or simply pre-order incentives. In the character action sphere, the concept has more weight, as it can also mean you'll see a new playable character with newfound depth, or an original, albeit brief, campaign. For the most part, DLC content isn't talked about at length. That's why I found it adequate to discuss a certain campaign that was released around a year ago at this point. The DLC in question is a part of the game Lost Judgment, and is labeled the Kaito Files. A campaign centered around everyone's favorite detective sidekick, voiced by the almighty Alucard in the English dub. In the years since its release, there hasn't been all that much content covering this entry, apart from an amazing character analysis by Writing on Games, and always delightful discussion pieces by the one and only Devilian7. But there is so much depth to this release that is yet to be explored. It's no exaggeration to say that I've found more enjoyment in this 5 to 10 hour campaign than I have with most recent AAA releases, because despite the confines that the DLC label may carry, this one entry fixes many issues present all throughout the gaming industry. To avoid repeating myself, there is a number of arguments I've made in a different video related to the design of the Yakuza games in general that definitely apply here. But even within the context of this franchise, the Kaito Files presents a significant improvement over RGG Studios' latest release, allowing characters to freely switch costumes outside of Premium Adventure upon acquiring a certain skill, fixing the insta-death contrivance of the many stealth segments, and showcasing several intriguing antagonists without sacrificing consistency. The combat is flashy and responsive, your son, who plays the role of an AI companion, doesn't feel like he's in your way, and the quote-unquote disposable level that is located in Chiba is brimming with more atmosphere than most modern open worlds. But we're not here to discuss the gameplay aspects of this entry. Instead, considering that it is Valentine's Day, I thought it would be better to explore the dynamics between the titular hero Kaito and his old flame Mikiko. Romance in video games can easily come off as cheesy, or simply unnecessary to the main narrative, assuming that the player doesn't just control a self-insert character. It's hard to write a love story that doesn't feel rushed to fill in some narrative blanks or invoke emotional depth with minimal effort. And that's why it's so interesting to me that the approach the Kaito Files took worked out so amazingly. And while a lot of it has to do with Kaito's own character, I feel that an equal amount of praise should go to Mikiko and even her son Jun. One rather controversial topic when it comes to dissecting the narratives of this franchise was the treatment of its female characters, and how they don't get fleshed out as much as the rest of the cast. And while I personally disagree with that notion, this seems to be a problem present in many gaming IPs. Adequate representation is very important, which is why you should devote much of your time to make those characters amazing in their own right, to strengthen the connection they would establish with your audience and invoke a true sense of belonging. Otherwise, you might wind up diminishing the value of said representation if you just add characters with no depth for the hell of it. What's amazing within the context of the Yakuza series is that it has many amazing female characters that have made a strong impact on the community at large. What's even more interesting is the fact that, according to the series creator Nagoshi-san himself, the majority of Yakuza fans in Japan are female, while he remarked that the fans overseas tend to fall into the quote-unquote Chad category. To finally tie all of this back to the topic at hand, for a narrative that doesn't just feature a romantic undertone, but is genuinely driven by it to work, it needs to be genuine. And that ingenuity permeates all throughout both Kaito's and Mikiko's characterization. They are direct in their expressions, very deliberate about their choice of words and body language, and beyond all else, they are incredibly protective of their loved ones. To an outsider, they may seem rough around the edges, but once you meet them, you found people who will follow you to the ends of the earth. That's why it's so interesting to see how two people who are so like-minded would interact in a romantic setting. When they first met, they were rather standoffish to one another, until that genuine side of them started to show. But at the same time, that direct approach can be a danger to the longevity of a proposed relationship. Neither Kaito nor Mikiko like to mince words, so it's to be expected that there would be a falling out somewhere down the line. Kaito is the most loyal person you can find in this franchise, which can even be one of his greatest weaknesses, as we've seen during a side case in the original Judgment. And this lack of willingness to leave anyone behind drove a wedge between him and Mikiko. When Kaito was asked to refrain from the Matsugane raid, he didn't see it as an ultimatum per se. He simply wanted to protect what he valued, and he values everyone in his life equally. That's just the way he is. But in this falling out, we see one of the many reasons why the protagonists of this franchise rarely get romantically involved. Their significant other will just get tired of having to worry about them surviving the day, or even worse, they may die due to the dangers of that world. At this point in time, Mikiko may have been the one who made the right choice after all, something even Kaito himself begrudgingly accepted in the time that passed after their breakup. They both had their grievances about the split, but Kaito never truly moved on. He's still the loyal man he always was, and is open about the things he loves or hates, which led to all of his romantic endeavors inevitably failing. Meanwhile, Mikiko, under pressure from her family and in a moment of vulnerability, wound up marrying someone else and having a son. But in retrospect, neither one of them was truly happy. That genuine approach that Mikiko and Kaito shared is one you rarely find in the world, no matter how close you may be to someone. This is why the initial setup for the Kaito Files makes for the perfect starting point. Originally, Kaito is presented with the possibility of Mikiko being dead by none other than her current husband. But even someone as direct as Kaito finds it hard to speak his mind on this matter. The memories of her are still strong with him, and the idea of your like-minded partner finally moving on, while you yourself refuse to do so, brings out an interesting conflict. One we never really saw before in this franchise. The romantic undertones aren't just a lazy addition here. They are the core of this very story, just dressed under the guise of your classic detective drama, campiness and all. The juxtaposition between Kaito's regular demeanor and the way he feels more vulnerable whenever Mikiko is involved is a sentiment that goes both ways. Except now, the tables are quite literally turned. The reason why Mikiko broke up with him was that he refused to change his mind about the raid, even if it may kill him in the end. And now Kaito has to stop her from throwing her life away in much the same way, over getting revenge for the murder of her family. The universe has a cruel sense of humor, doesn't it? Fortunately, through his own efforts and the efforts of his son figure Jun, Kaito managed to reconnect with her and have a genuine heart-to-heart. He realizes how his perception of her having moved on with her life wasn't quite accurate, much like Mikiko's perception of Kaito's lifestyle wound up falling through. While they may be at different points in life, they haven't really changed that much. They're still as brash and unapologetic as always, and they were brought back together because of it. Naturally, no good love story can conclude without an unwanted conflict, and may I present to you, conflict. I'm not going to go into the specifics of Shirakaba's character, but I'll just say that I've always felt uneasy whenever he was around. Let me remind you, this is a guy who took care of Mikiko while she had amnesia, and forged a death certificate with actual DNA samples so that people wouldn't go looking for her. He lied through his teeth to preserve a connection that was built on tragic convenience, while never genuinely talking to Mikiko about her past, nor the future the two of them could supposedly share. It's a selfish, one-sided way of showing care for someone else. That's why so many of his actions in the story just feel mismatched. He says he wants what's best for Mikiko, but never actually talks to her about it. He sends Kaito a warning letter about his intentions of proposing to her, only to then show genuine disdain when Kaito actually shows up to confess to her. But despite everything I've just said, the final conflict here still felt justified. Because this isn't a story about Shirakaba. This is a story about two estranged lovers finally reconnecting, even if the world at large would condemn that notion. The fact that Kaito and Shirakaba have a chivalrous one-on-one fistfight to win the right to confess is something that could easily come off as crude or childish, if handled carelessly. And here's the thing, the sheer nature of that being the final fight of the campaign is as direct and unapologetically sincere as the two characters whose love story now unfolds. Discussing what the best living conditions or the quote-unquote stable choice would be doesn't fit the climax of the story. It was initially that type of thinking that led Mikiko to meet her ex-husband, who turned out to be an absolute psychopath. The only way the two of them could truly move on would be to speak from the heart. And that is Kaito's strongest quality. This is who he is. He is emotion incarnate. No matter what logic may dictate, no matter how poor his living conditions may be, he knows what he wants out of life, but is still strangely at a loss for words. The funniest thing about this is how both Mikiko and Shirakaba verbally nudged him to be himself, and show that more vulnerable side of him for all to see. And maybe that was the intention of this fight all along. It felt like an over-the-top way to finally make your friend speak his mind and confess, because no matter how direct Kaito may be, he still needed that last push. That same push that could have prevented their initial breakup, the one time he didn't fully speak his mind. Through everything we've experienced in this brief journey, even a character as complete as Kaito managed to grow a bit. And the same goes for Mikiko, who may finally realize why Kaito acted the way he did back in the day, now that she was in a similar situation. This encounter was the last piece of the puzzle they needed to finally take the next step in life. This DLC gave us something no other Yakuza game did before. An actual happy ending to a romance. A justified end that may feel kind of cheesy here and there, but due to the nature of the characters driving it, loops back around to being amazing. Unlike your average story-driven characters who just wind up falling in love, this is a great example of a character-driven story that never deviated from the intended sentiment. And we're barely scratching the surface here. I haven't spoken about the great villains we have seen, the amazing soundtrack, the plot points this DLC may set up for the future of the Judgment franchise. It's barely been a year since this campaign came out, and I want to talk about it more in the years to come as well. I want this to be as fondly remembered as the mainline entries in Yakuza, because even though it may be short, even though it may lack a New Game Plus, it has moved me in ways only an RGG narrative ever could. So take this as my personal recommendation. If you're having second thoughts about buying the DLC and weren't bothered by the spoilers here, this is a game genuinely worth your time. I'm not sponsored by Sega or anything, but man, wouldn't that be the dream. This is just a fan speaking his mind. And with that, I shall bid you farewell. Until next time, take care of yourselves and have a great day. Cheers!